Welcome to Volution, and welcome to Volution 101, which is a 2-hour kind of in-depth workshop that focuses on everything Volution, meaning all the concepts and principles that are behind what we're trying to achieve as an organization and as a conference, which is focused on building livable communities with transit. First of all, I just wanted to check and see who in the crowd is here for the first time. Whoa. Well, now I know we really need to go deep. So how many of you are public officials? How many are private sector engineering planners, folks like that? How about city planners working for the city? Advocates? All right. And let me say activists. Come on. So anyway, well, it's really great to see such a diverse group of folks here today representing so many places. Let me ask you, how many are from the East Coast, West Coast, the center of the world, Midwest? Okay. So anyway, we've got a great diversity of folks here, and that's exactly what we want to have in this room, but also to have here at Volution. So this is a great opportunity to learn a little bit more about some of the principles and concepts that underlie the idea of building livable communities with transit. Volution envisions cities and regions that are transformed into livable places that are healthy, economically vibrant, socially equitable, and environmentally sustainable, where people have transportation choices. The group of folks here today represent a diversity of perspectives. We have mayors, congressmen, we've got heads of DOT, we have someone from the foundation world, someone representing the developer community, and then someone very experienced in doing placemaking work nationally. So we've got a great group of folks that I think can tell the story better than I can. We're going to have each panelist is going to take about 10 minutes or so to just kind of tell a little story. And I'll try to raise a question in between the panelists, and then at the end, hopefully we'll have about 20 minutes for a Q&A session, and I'll go around and ask you to stand up, say your name, and we'll go from there. So with that, I want to just introduce Earl Blumenauer, who, if you were at the plenary session this morning, doesn't really need an introduction, but he's a congressman from the Portland area of Oregon, has been involved and founder of Volution, is actively supporting all of the work we do, but also travels extensively around the country to support efforts in all kinds of regions and with all kinds of people. We owe Earl a great deal of gratitude for his support and efforts. With that, I'll just have Earl, please come on up.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you and the team for putting what I think is the best Volution yet. It's just really spectacular. Watching the interaction, the diversity of people who are here is, for me, encouraging in ways I can't describe. I got into this business early, back when Seattle was deciding that it wasn't dealing with light rail. I was a local official in Portland. I had been in the middle of the initial light rail line that was created. It was a line that we got by trading in a freeway and combining it with a little freeway improvement and sending money throughout the region. We were able to construct Portland's first light rail line. It was extraordinarily controversial at the time. And those of you who endured my comments early in the morning, the comment I made about there was a Tea Party before there was a Tea Party, some people were violently opposed to having the light rail. It was being constructed essentially for free, and we were putting it in existing very generous rights of way. We found, I am a Portland native, I actually went to high school in the eastern portion where the light rail was being strongly opposed. I can remember going to a hearing with my then 2-year-old daughter strapped to my back for protection. People were really, really cranky about it for reasons that you don't really need to know. It was just there and trying to contend with it. And then after we got to the point where we were able to open the light rail line, I had been a county commissioner sharing responsibility for the area that the right-of-way went through, working with people, trying to develop different plans under Oregon's historic land use planning process. We tried to do a little early stationary development. I mean, it was just fascinating. The opposition of now it's Kroger's had a vast 42-acre site, an intersection of 2 freeways and the light rail, and they insisted on locating light rail as far away as they could from their store. I mean, the stories I could tell. The people who ran this little town of Gresham, Oregon, if they couldn't kill light rail, they were trying to get it as far away from the center of their city as they could, and they had some success. But we watched, within 18 months of the light rail opening, they were moving their downtown to the light rail. I had a chance to be a part of the opening celebration, which was controversial at the time. The then gubernatorial candidates were making the opening of light rail, which was going to be almost coincident with the election. I actually had people from one of the gubernatorial candidates' campaign come to me to see if we could delay the opening of light rail until after the election, because they were convinced that it would be such a disaster that it would scuttle him. Well, we were able to have 250,000 people on the first weekend of light rail and made every station into a celebration. And it really fundamentally changed the mindset. And I came away from that experience absolutely convinced that it is the citizen infrastructure that is essential. Every bit as careful in terms of land use planning, engineering, having the right contractors. It's the citizen infrastructure. And I had that driven home to me in spades when I was elected immediately after the light rail opening to be Portland's Commissioner of Public Works. We have this odd system, the only commission form of government left in the country, where the mayor's primary power is to assign administrative tasks to the other 4 members of the council. And I had transportation, land use planning. I mean, it's a great portfolio. But I found that Portland citizens are pretty smart. They figured out that I could affect where stop signs were and signal synchronization. And I found out that anybody with a driver's license was a certified traffic engineer. You know the story. And they were convinced that everything we did was wrong. I mean, we either paved the streets too soon or too late. I mean, they were just, after about 10 months of this, I'd had enough. And worked to create a transportation class where we paid the tuition of the citizens. It was taught, some of you may know Rick Gustafson, who does a lot of the streetcar stuff around the country. We commissioned Rick to teach the class. And I kicked it off, but then I would come at the end of the semester and listen to their best projects. But in between, they had to listen to the real transportation engineer. They had to listen to people on the planning commission, the planning director, the transit agency. They went out and looked at situations, and they found out about traffic behaviors. And it was amazing. We have now done this 23 semesters. There's an alumni association, I think, of over 1,400 people. They still think that everything we do is wrong, but they know why. And we have ended up, over the years, funding dozens of their projects because they figured it out and they were a part of it. And they are a strong constituency for our doing, at times, some stuff that's a little edgy. That was part of the genesis of why we have this conference. Because I was looking to expand the light rail line into a system, and my earlier experience had convinced me that we had to have the citizens engaged with those decisions. We started a regional rail program. We literally went door to door. We had neighborhood house parties. And every year, we had a regional rail summit. The first one was in a little church in Northeast Portland on a Saturday. We thought, we'd get 50, 75 people. We'd roll up our sleeves. We'd talk this through. Standing room only, 300 people, on one of the few days that it didn't rain in Portland. We had an obscure guy. What was his name? Calthorpe, I think. And it was magic for me to be able to understand what we had to do going forward. We did it every year. It expanded. We did the visual preference survey. Any of you ever done that? Anton Nellison had this technique where people could look at landscape pictures and judge it on a 21-point scale from 10, really cool, to 10, not in my state, or being neutral. We administered to 10,000 people. And you know what we found out? Students, geezer baby boomers like me, suburban, inner city, we agreed with more than we disagreed. Excuse me. And that grew. The third regional rail summit, we had 800 people, 6 states and British Columbia. And we decided it's a national conference. And ever since, we've been trying to carry that platform nationally. My voice is giving out when my story's over.
Well, here's your water.
Thank you. Because Volution is the extension of that notion of building the citizen infrastructure and engaging people who are conferees to be a part with Dan, the steering committee, the board, to help shape it in directions that make sense for you. We think we've got great partners. We've done stuff with the Congress, with New Urbanism, with APTA, the American Planning Association, a whole range of groups and organizations that do outstanding work. And I'm proud to partner with them in Washington, D.C. But we think this is kind of a unique confluence of all of those strands, all of those trends, to focus on the citizen infrastructure, what it is and what it can be. And I deeply appreciate your being here. I'm looking forward to hearing from people who really know what they're doing, who've had some connection, so that together we can not only share with you what Volution has meant, where it is, but more important, where it's going, to be able to be a tool for you, your communities, and people around the country who need to hear the story. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Earl. Appreciate the kickoff. I did forget to say one thing about folks that are looking for ASLA continuing education credits. Please complete the sign-in forms outside the door when you're done if you're looking for those credits. Also, the APA AICP continuing education credits are still available through the online self-reporting form. Just for those of you who are here trying to get some credit, I just want to let you know. And I forgot to mention, I'm Dan Bartholomew, the CEO of Volution, and I'm so happy to be a part of the organization for 2 years, and I feel very lucky to be a part of this movement as we go forward. With that, I'm going to introduce GB Arrington. GB is the principal of GB Placemaking. GB has a distinguished career in this field, focusing on placemaking, having been in the field for, I think, at least 25 years, and having worked for Parsons Brinkerhoff to put together their placemaking division. GB is a longtime supporter and a longtime National Steering Committee member of Volution. So he brings a depth and a breadth of knowledge. So he's going to be providing some really fundamental understanding of the concepts for you today. Thank you.
Well, Dan, you only made me 15 years younger with that introduction. So, good or bad, I've been doing this a really long time. And, when we started talking about TOD, it was all about cartoons because not enough of it had been built. And now, there's a lot of built practice out there, and you probably all have different definitions of what TOD is. So what I want to do is touch a little bit on some of the myths and what you think you know, and ask you maybe to think about transit-oriented development in a little bit different way. So let's get beyond the myths. Let's look at some of the principles, how value is created, what the market is, look at some built case studies, and then some conclusions. So, development next to transit is transit-oriented development, right? No. We have TOD, and then we have its evil brother, TAD, transit-adjacent development. And a majority of the U.S. transit stations where the development occurs is not transit-oriented, it's transit-adjacent. Because transit-oriented development is still illegal at a majority of the transit stops in the United States. Not because we took an overt action to say we didn't want it, because we took an overt action to leave in our suburban auto-oriented codes in place. So it's not enough to be shaped to be next to transit, you need to be shaped by it. So the picture at the top where you see the boxes with little blue trim that look like a herd of Kmarts, that's Cisco Systems World Headquarters. It's adjacent to transit. There's a wonderful transit station there with art, and it's a great place to contemplate art because there's no one there to bother you. And so because there's that big transportation land use disconnect with everybody having their parking space. So if we want development next to transit, it needs to be shaped by transit in terms of greater density, less parking, better public realm, a mix of uses, walkable, and then we need to tame the automobile. So this is one of Portland's early TODs, Orenco Station, and the fundamentals of good TOD are the same as the fundamentals of a great neighborhood. Safe streets, strong center, local services, parks and open space, housing choices, and good jobs. And so hopefully those are things that we can all agree about. So what causes that? Because of course it's caused by transit because it's transit-oriented. Not true either. One of the problems with transit is that much of our transit systems are designed around the automobile and designed around the belief that you use transit by driving to it because that's what we used to do in the past. So the top picture is a just about brand new station in Washington, D.C., Branch Avenue, 3,100 surface parking spaces. You can't get to the transit unless you drive to the transit. The plan is for this to be a regional center, but the design of the station blocks that from happening. And so, they've been actually trying to retrofit the plans for, a pretty new station to be able to change it to be transit-oriented. So part of what we're trying to do is to link transit to that broader strategy of achieving community objectives. So it's a lot more than transit. It's about what's the community's vision for how they want to grow, how we build the essential partnerships, and then gaining a broader base of support. So by linking transit to development, transit becomes more important and you get that broader base of support that Earl was talking about. It's about understanding the marketplace, emerging trends in real estate. Just about every year talks about how, one of the biggest and fastest growing segments is about green, infill, and TOD. When we look at who lives in TODs, majority of the residents are childless, empty nesters, young urban professionals. And interestingly, while transit riders tend to have a lower income on a regional basis, TOD residents have a higher income on a regional basis, in part because it's new product. And that's actually a challenge because we need to have affordable and equitable TOD, not just expensive latte TODs. Big market trends in terms of more and more millennials, wanting urban product. 88% of Gen Y wants to be in an urban setting. They're willing to pay more for that. Us baby boomers, there's only 76 million of us, but there's 80 million of Gen Y. So 88% of 80 million want something. That's probably a pretty big number, however you do the math. We now have enough of these projects to know why people are choosing to live next to transit in kind of order of priority. They want well-designed communities. They want easy access to a center. They want a high-quality residence. By the way, you don't need to take notes because all this will be online later, all these PowerPoints for the whole conference. But if you want to take notes, that's fine. They want pedestrian-friendly, and they want good price value. So you're selling community, the ability to walk to that pint of milk as opposed to have to drive to it. So this must be a great TOD. You've got a bicycle, a train, vertical, mixed use, a calm street. But that building is a building, and what we're trying to do is to create centers, a series of projects, 18 hours of activity, quality public realm, put employment closest to transit, and make it compact and dense. So there's a Renko again on one side of the screen. A few stops away is the Round at Beaverton Central. The challenge with the Round isn't that it doesn't look nice at the ground scale, it's that what's around it. How did it become a community as opposed to just an urban thing in the middle of suburban splatter? So maybe the Round is just incomplete, but what we're trying to do is build these complete places, more like a Renko. So think of TOD as more than a parcel, more than a project. It's a walkable district, that 5-minute walk around the station. And the challenge then is that most of what you'll hear about at this conference are projects as opposed to districts. And we need to kind of raise the bar so we're creating districts as opposed to just projects. Mission Bay in San Francisco is a good example of a district. It's urban redevelopment, it's a university campus, it's high density housing, it's mixed use, it's a baseball stadium. And so lots of examples like that is what we need more of. So TODs need less parking because we have transit. Well, sometimes they need less parking, sometimes they need the same amount of parking. So what we need is limited and managed parking. It's always going to be the most challenging issue in implementing transit-oriented development. So we need to think about the size, the location, and the design and the management of the parking. So do things like no minimums, but have maximums. Disconnect the parking from the buildings and manage it by district. But you're probably going to have to park for sale product at the same ratios as for sale product away from transit because people still view their car as part of the resale value of that condominium. So you can have tighter, but you're still going to need more times than not to have the parking there. On the other hand, we do know that TODs behave differently because they create less trips. So a TOD creates 3.55 daily auto trips. Multiple family without transit, 6.67 daily auto trips, and single family, 10 daily auto trips. So part of the reason for that is that people that live at TODs are twice as likely not to own a car as U.S. residents. They're 5 times more likely to commute by transit than others in the region. And the big reason for that is because they self-selected to live next to transit because they like transit. They use transit. And so we need to get our traffic engineering aligned with the reality of trip generation in terms of what happens with TODs. So in TOD, we're supposed to maximize mixed use. You've seen all the cartoons with the kid holding the balloon and walking in a mixed use project. Well, part of the problem is that our planners, those of you that raised the hand, you're guilty of over-requiring mixed use at TODs. I mean, the most common occupant of many of these mixed use projects is a for lease sign because we've over-required it. It can be vertical. It can be horizontal mixed use. It's the most difficult element of these projects to do, but it has great benefits in terms of getting more walking, more transit ridership, reducing auto use. And we ought to prohibit auto-oriented uses closest to transit. So a McDonald's is an auto-oriented use only when it has a drive-through. If it doesn't have a drive-through, it can be a walkable use. This is a Pearl District in Portland, so it's a really good example of a mixed-use place done through public-private partnerships, a long-term vision, lots of development, tight parking, and then through public policy, this is one of those places where it's actually 22% affordable. So, it's not just a latte TOD. So density must be what makes these projects, more viable. We certainly want medium to higher density. We want it greater than the community average. Distance is really important in terms of how close you are or far away you are from transit. But we also need to think about minimum densities as an effective tool. So transit alone doesn't create the value. That value comes from the overall development market, land available for development, supportive plans and policies, and designing transit for value. Now, when you do that right, you do get rent premiums. So these are from Washington, D.C. 28% higher rents for being next to transit in the District of Columbia. In the affluent suburbs of Virginia and of Maryland, a 40% rent premium from being adjacent to transit. This is from the Washington Post just last week. They're actually concerned that there's so much TOD happening in the pipeline that the transit system will not be able to carry the riders. 84% of the region's new office, which is over 5 million square feet in the pipeline, is within a quarter mile of transit. 84%. 25,000 new residential units combined 2012, 2013 next to transit. They added a new station next to Union Station. Land values since that station came in on the 65 acres have gone up by 330%, and 84% of the region's land value is on just 4% of the land, which is the land next to transit. So those are pretty impressive numbers. In Portland, TriMet recently commissioned a study to look at how the blue line that goes from Hillsborough to Gresham is affecting the pace of development, and they found that they got 36% more development than otherwise would have happened because of the presence of the light rail line. So we all know that the half mile is the walk shed. You've all heard that, and maybe it isn't. We want small blocks. We want it to be compact and pedestrian oriented. We want to do all these things to orient development to sidewalks, make it walkable. But on the other hand, different kinds of land use behave in a different way. So this is going back to Washington, D.C. again, and you can see that right at the station, they capture 35% of the trips on transit for office, but a half mile away, it's only 10%. But with residential, a half mile away, it's still 31%. So you need to put office and retail very close to transit because people won't walk as far, but they'll walk much further for residential. So part of these rules of thumb are to apply the rules of thumb properly because people will walk a half mile from their home, but they won't walk a half mile to their office. So let's just do the planning. That's all we need to do, right? Do the planning right. Well, it needs to be planning that's grounded in implementation, that applies those powers of partnerships, that's driven by the marketplace as opposed to just driven by transit and designed for the pedestrian. So start with a vision for where you want to go. Define a clear path and roles and responsibilities to get there. And then when you're intervening in the marketplace with public funding, be very clear about why you're doing that and what you're trying to do. Don't subsidize, don't give tax benefits for just being next to transit. Insist on getting higher performance in exchange for those public dollars in terms of things like density, mix, design, affordability, and green infrastructure. I think governments need to have a role in demonstrating the proof of the concept of TOD by constantly moving the market higher and asking for more and more performance, getting more comps, so that you can catalyze more investment and projects that can then be further replicated over time. So obviously you're going to wait till you have rail to do this or a really, really good bus service, and you don't actually need to wait for transit. The same planning and development fundamentals apply whether it's transit-oriented, pedestrian-oriented, or development-oriented transit. You have pedestrians in your cities today, even if you don't have great transit in all of your cities today, so we can design our communities around walking. So if we think about the evolution, we start with a TOD plan, maybe then it's rail or bus and walkable streets. It's partnerships and some of those public dollars coming in to get demonstration projects and then building it out as a district. The other thing that's happening is it's lots of different partners. The roles and the key of those partnerships is really critical in being able to deliver transit-oriented development. And then just finally to wrap up, of course, these ideas only work in places like the People's Republic of Portland. You can't export those to your home, right? Because these ideas won't work where you live. And, you know, I think we know now that there's strong preferences in the marketplace for doing this stuff. There's lots of experience to draw from. The demographic trends are favorable, and there's a favorable, at least federal policy support, even though there's a little bit of hostility in Washington, D.C. today about cities. So just to wrap up, it's about community building and people moving. The trends are on your side. Plan for the pedestrian. Leverage the power of partnerships. Raise your aspirations. Make TOD legal and easy, and then develop a strategy equal to the task. So Dan gave me a little bit more time, but I finished under it, so I really appreciate your hearing from you later. Thanks.
Well, that was a lot of information to absorb, wasn't it? Can you guys repeat what he just said? Anyway, it's great to have both Earl talk a little bit about how this whole Railvolution movement got started, and to GB to kind of undergird and talk about the principles of TOD. Now we're going to move into some other perspectives. Chris Coos, who's the mayor of Normal, Illinois, is going to share his perspective on how these issues are important from a perspective of a mid-size Midwest city as a mayor who's trying to use transit and transit-related work to kind of spur economic development in his community. With that, I'll welcome Chris.
Very happy to be here to talk about my community, and I would like you to filter what I have to say through Earl's comments earlier, because he is exactly spot on in terms of the process of what you have to do in a community from the public sector. The public realm is owned by the citizens of your community, and the sooner that you understand that when undertaking a project and embrace that, the more successful you're going to be in your project. And thank you, GB, for the segue on it only happens in Portland. No, it can happen just about anywhere if you really want to make it happen. Normal, Illinois is a community of about 52,000 people in the center of the state of Illinois. We have a sister city, Bloomington, of about 78,000 people, a metro area of about 150,000 people. Yet 10 years ago, we were able to embark on an exciting effort to create a livable community. We didn't know what a livable community was at that time. We were pragmatic people, but we set on a path that we thought was the best for our community, and it would allow our community to grow. And guess what? It ended up being a livable community. What we did was take a look at our central business district, which was quite small for the size of the community. The community had grown, but the central business district did not. As most communities my size, you saw a lot of growth on the perimeter, malls and expressways and things like that. But we had some things we thought we could leverage. We had adjacency to Illinois State University, 21,000 students, and we were on a fairly active at the time Amtrak rail corridor from Chicago to St. Louis. We began our process with a lot of planning, and we took a lot of heat for the planning that we did because we spent a lot of money on consultants, and we felt that we needed to hire the best and look hard at what we were doing in our community. We started on a master plan developed by Farr & Associates in Chicago. I'm glad we worked with them in 2000 because today they've been so successful, I don't think we could afford them. So we looked at our strengths, those two strengths, and we thought we could build on those. One of the issues we had in our planning process had to do with transportation. We had an Amtrak station near our central business district, but not in our central business district, and it was built in the 80s but it was across the tracks and away from the uptown area. And what was happening in that scenario was, Amtrak in the 80s wasn't running very much on time. And we had people sitting around in a small building and unaware of a business district that was probably 200 yards away. So part of the initial plan was to get that transit center in the right place, and we moved it into the uptown area. The other issue we were dealing with is you would go here for Amtrak, you'd go here for local bus, you'd go here for regional bus, you'd go over here for airport shuttles to Midway and O'Hare airports in Chicago. And we thought we need to bring all these transportation elements under one roof. So our transportation center became a multimodal facility. And today we do have all those modes of transportation under one roof. And the connectivity, to watch the energy of that connectivity is pretty exciting. The government started to embrace high-speed rail. High-speed rail had always been a conversation in Illinois because of the Chicago-St. Louis corridor. It was a pretty active corridor. And we always believed that high-speed rail would be a future in our community. The Obama administration really embraced the notion of high-speed rail, and the Chicago-St. Louis corridor was identified as one of the early starts. And through the funding for high-speed rail in the community, Illinois, or in the nation, Illinois got $1.2 billion to develop the high-speed rail corridor in our community, or through our community. As you all know, there was a lot of pushback on that, and states like Indiana and Wisconsin and Florida rejected high-speed rail dollars, but Illinois was more than happy to take their share of those dollars. So we were able to get quite a bit more money to implement high-speed rail in our community. What's important for this, you heard in the plenary the notion of connectivity. We are 120 miles from downtown Chicago, and most of our train traffic goes to Chicago. With the advent of high-speed rail, our community will be an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes from downtown Chicago, and that is equivalent to the commute that somebody in the western suburbs would make on Metro or by car. It's about the same amount of time. So what that has done is actually moved us physically closer to Chicago. And we're already seeing interest in that high-speed rail line becoming as much of a commuter line into Chicago as it is a passenger rail line for recreation and business. Some of the other successes as a result of this were we have a very large hotel project in our community that came as a result of our plan. It's a Marriott, full-service Marriott hotel, 120 rooms, 40,000 square feet of conference center, which seems out of place in a community our size, but it's working very well because of our connectivity to transportation. The developer of that project had built about 150 hotels. He'd never built a hotel in an urban market. He always was on the interstate. He thought that's where it needed to be. And we brought him into the community, showed him what we were doing, showed him our plan, and he said, I'll build your hotel there. And it's been a wildly successful hotel. The one concession we did make to him is he said, you just got to be able to see that Marriott sign from the interstate. I said, yeah, your building's tall enough, you'll be able to do that. If you live in a university community, too, I'll give you a little hint. If you're courting a developer to come into your community, bring them into your community the weekend the university students are moving in. Paints an entirely different picture. If you're in a university community, you know what I mean. We did a number of other innovative projects in the community. One that I'm quite proud of is a roundabout that replaced a traffic snarl of monumental proportions. It's a very environmentally sound roundabout. It moves traffic very well. And it received, last year, it received the Federal Highway Authority's administration's National Award for Civic Design. Now, what's sweet about that award is 3 years prior to that, when we were sitting in a room with Federal Highway Authority, they told us there is no way you're going to build that roundabout. It doesn't match the book. So we're very, very proud of that. So what have we learned from the process? That as government, you've got to put on your entrepreneurial hat sometimes. You have to look at the private development that you're bringing into your community and realize that those people have to make a profit, and the project that they're doing has to make sense for them. You have to engage your public. You have to be tenacious. We're 10 years into our plan, and we still have more work to do. You have to be tenacious and polite, and you have to engage your public. We quit counting on public meetings we had on Uptown redevelopment at about meeting 85. And I can tell you, there is no such thing as talking too much to your public when you're trying to do an innovative project. That's a lesson I had to learn the hard way. We had failures along the way because we didn't do that. We got out in front of our public because we were charging along. We were saying this is such a great project. We got out a little too far out in front of them. So we learned that lesson, and take that one away if there's any takeaway from here. So currently we have, in about a 6-block area, about $165 million of private development, about $80 million of public investment in infrastructure and buildings and the high-speed, our civic portion of the high-speed rail. And we've got about another $65 million worth of projects moving forward. And this is in a community of about, again, 55,000 people. It's almost harder to take 7 to 10 minutes to talk about your community than it is in an hour. So write this one down, www.normal.org. This afternoon, there will be a link for Volution invitees, and it'll be up for a couple of weeks. If you want to take a deeper look in terms of what we've done in our community to make it a more livable, enjoyable place to be. Thank you.
So now you've heard another perspective that I think gives you a sense of really a lot of things, but particularly how important it is to engage the public and citizens in processes and projects so that you don't get stopped when you're getting forward momentum and to keep the balls rolling. With that, I want to introduce Dan Grabowskis, who has been working at senior management levels at the in public transit agencies for the last 20 years. Dan is the CEO of Honolulu Transit, which is building out a new rail line, 20-mile rail line with 21 stations. He has the distinct history of running MBTA as well, so he's both the former CEO of the oldest transit system in the country and the CEO of the newest transit system in the country. And with that, I'll welcome Dan.
Aloha. Yes, we say that, and yes, we dress like this for business. It is a great pleasure for me to be here to share our Volution that's taking place on the island of Oahu, and tell you that after 40 years of planning and a lot of discussions, many community meetings, that we are right now embarked on the construction of the first light metro system in Honolulu. It's, as Dan mentioned, 20 miles long, 21 stations, and we've actually begun construction really just in the last couple of months. So it's very exciting for me to be here. It's also exciting for us to be here, and I'll say that because I guess a year ago at the last conference, there were about a dozen people from Hawaii. I see a few faces. Everybody from Honolulu, raise your hands in here. We got 33 people at this conference. And we are really excited about what the Volution that is taking place there because of the catalyst, this new rail project, excuse me. So I was asked by Dan to share with you our worldview. So there's our worldview. Thank you. We are, in fact, the most isolated population center on the globe. So when it comes to things like natural urban growth boundaries, we have 2,400 miles of ocean. We've also got the Ko'olau Mountains on the other side. So we have our state on 8 islands, and on the island of Oahu is where we have 1 million of the 1.3 million people. You don't think of Hawaii as densely populated. Probably many of you have already. I seem to find out that people like to share their stories of their honeymoon when you tell them if you're from Hawaii. And a lot of folks go to the neighbor islands, to the less populated islands, but and don't spend time in Oahu. But if you did, you'd find out that we are very densely populated, and we have a lot of people who are concentrated there. We're also number 4 after New York, Chicago, and LA, believe it or not, for having the largest number of high-rises, skyscrapers. So we are a densely populated place and little known. We also have some of the worst congestion in the United States. I do not say this proudly, but it is true. We usually compete with Los Angeles for the worst congestion, and on a daily basis, if you actually lived and worked there, you would see that we have 7-8 lanes of traffic in each direction, and somehow they're both packed every morning and every afternoon. And because of that, we have really created an opportunity for us to really take advantage, if you will, to this density that's taken place. So this is our project. We have, as I said, 20 miles, 21 stations, and you literally are squeezed between the mountains and the ocean, and that's where 1 million people live. And as I tell folks who sometimes on Oahu question whether or not we're big enough a city to have a light metro system, I tell them, it's not the number of people. There's probably more people in the state of Kansas than there are in the state of Hawaii, but very few are in as densely populated an area as we have here. And we have a wonderful transit system today. We have, by almost any definition, one of the most widely ridden bus systems on a per capita basis. Usually we're in the top 3, often and always in the top 5. And this is a snapshot in the middle of the day using GPS of where our buses are operating. And you can see that they are, in fact, operating in that same dense corridor, serving the people that we've got. So when we talk about density, we're not kidding. By the time that we're in the next 15 years, we're going to have 70% of our residents and 80% of our jobs in that corridor. We say basically, a mile or so on each side of the rail, and in some cases we don't have a mile to go to the water. So this is a very, very dense corridor. Our project is going to take off in 2019. The full 20 miles will be up and running, and we're looking to take 40,000 vehicles each day off the road. I'm going to run through these next few slides pretty quickly. I don't need to tell anybody who is looking at a light metro system or a rail system to see that there are tremendous economic benefits, the creation of jobs, but also what benefits we have that happens after that, and that's what we're all here about with transit-oriented development. And the other thing about Honolulu, in addition to the worst traffic and the highest gas prices, is it is also, that makes it the best place to take a car out of your equation in your homeowner, as a homeowner. If you can get rid of a car in Honolulu, you can save $11,000 after taxes. So it's the best place to do that. Great environmental benefits for our project. We're looking to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. We're going to be an electric system. And not only will we first have the mobility benefits that we're looking forward to when we get up and running, but planning for those transit-oriented development benefits, the long-term benefits. So I talk about this being a railvolution. It's been exciting for me in the last 18 months since I've come on the job to walk around Honolulu and have people, average folks, just talk about transit-oriented development, something that people didn't really even focus on a couple of years ago. But today, it's all the rage, and it's very, very exciting. With the advent of this project, we have the opportunity to really reshape how we will grow on the island of Oahu. And again, to put an extra point to the interest, we have the managing director, who's basically the person who manages our city here. We've got our Department of Transportation Services director. We have our Department of Planning and Permitting director here, as well as a number of other advocates. And Harrison Rue, I don't know if Harrison's in here, but if you get a chance to see him, he's our TOD person who's in charge of pulling all this stuff together. And we're all here because we're really excited about learning what we can from you and hopefully share a little bit about the stuff that we're doing there. We've, in just the last year, had our city council pass bike plan, complete streets. Again, for some of you, maybe old hat, but for us, this is really taking what has been, for most of the time, a very auto-centric place in Oahu and really getting people to think in different ways. And as I mentioned, it is very, very important for us to be able to focus on this because we don't have a lot of choice. We don't have a lot of land to sprawl onto. And so what's really important for us is to focus with this opportunity on things that we can do in the future. So Pacific Resources Partnership, Pacific Resources Partners, who is an offshoot of the Carpenters Union, actually engaged Peter Calthorpe to take a look at the challenges that we're facing for sustainable growth on the island of Oahu. And I was able to borrow from them a couple of slides, which I'll share with you, about, well, what if we just did business as usual? What if we engaged with our new rail project on a very limited basis? Or what if we really grabbed with gusto this opportunity and planned around each of our transit stations and planned in the way that was described, really facing, looking at these folks as, these opportunities as, the districts that we can create. And what we found in this study is that it will basically preserve our island and allow for opportunity for growth for young people, not to have to leave the island, because we can grow, we can have infill development, we can grow denser, we can grow taller, and we can also grow where we want to grow. So we have what we call our second city in Kapolei, where we are expanding. It's at the end of the rail line, and it is the planned growth for the future. Well, what does it all mean? Well, what we boiled it down to is that we're able to make a huge difference in terms of what we are going to consume in the land that we have. If we, in fact, act and take this opportunity fully, then we really will. Then we'll be able to consume about a third of the land that we would otherwise be consuming with no action. And that, to me, is really one of the most exciting opportunities with the project that we've got. I'll just wrap up to say that our project is now on track. As I said, we've started construction. It's the single largest public works project in the history of the state of Hawaii. Its first 10 miles will open in 2017 and a full 20 miles in 2019. So we've got a lot of work to do, but what is happening in parallel to the construction is a number of these community meetings that we are holding, and some really intense planning that's getting us to focus again on the opportunity. So that's my little worldview. It's pretty exciting. I'd encourage anybody who wants to come by and see. Honolulu's not a bad place to visit, and I can just tell you that we are, I think, really doing some innovative things in Honolulu, and we're also doing things, I think, right. We've got a great leader in Mayor Kirk Caldwell, who was just elected, and he has really taken this spirit that is Volution to heart, and made what we're doing really relevant, not just for the mobility benefits, but for the livability benefits for the future. So with that, I will say thank you and be happy to engage with you later.
So that's a pretty exciting story to think about the transition that's going to happen in Honolulu after all these years. It'll be very fascinating to see, really the lifestyle changes that result from that. It's pretty exciting to think about. I want to introduce Christopher Coase, who's the managing director of Locus, which is a network of real estate developers and investors who advocate for sustainable, walkable development. Christopher has a background in the consulting world, working on government affairs, and was involved in startup of T4 America, which is a national advocacy organization that works on federal policy, and has moved over to Locus, about 3-4 years ago, to start that up. And Locus is really an exciting new effort by well-informed and well-intentioned developers to think about how they can promote more of what we're all about here today. And with that, I'll introduce Christopher.
All right, so Again, I'm Christopher. Normally, every time I start these sessions, I ask for one thing. Can someone just clear me a path straight to the door? Because normally, as representing the real estate developers, normally we get run out of the room. So hopefully that won't happen today. But just in case, I'm just going to come right here. Well, with that being said, I take this opportunity, again, to say thank you to Dan and to the Revolution Selection Committee, just asking for Locust to be a part of this conference. I know we've been part of this now for the past 2 years, and continue to figure out ways we can increasingly get the real estate community, particularly developers and investors, more engaged in this conversation. So just for a few minutes, based on my time here, I'm just going to give you a quick couple of thoughts of what we believe from a development community standpoint are some of the major perspectives as it pertains to walkable urban communities, TOD. One of the first things I had to say is that, we talk about revolution, right? We spent a lot about the rail, what it takes to build TOD, but we don't talk a lot about the volution, the idea of the movement itself. And one of the things that Locust and a lot of the people I work with is that these are individuals like the Four Cities of the world, like JBG, even Dan Gilbert, who's revolutionizing Detroit, or other developers who are doing things in LA, changing communities. That's the revolution, right? Changing places, making it exciting for people like me, those of us who are 30, called millennials, or those who are Gen X or baby boomers, to actually want to have a place to live. I say that to say in that one of the biggest things for this revolution that I see from our perspective that is working in our favor. Because oftentimes we will talk about TOD on a local level, and we talk about the headaches that we're seeing in town hall meetings and having the issues with zoning changes and how much brain drain that can be. But one of the biggest assets that we currently have today is the market has changed. The idea that the revolution or the revolution that we're speaking of, we have an engine that no one can change right now. And one of the best ways to articulate that is how many people are familiar with the idea that Atlanta, Georgia is the king of sprawl. How many people have visited Atlanta recently? Or any past 10, 15 years? One of my colleague, Chris Lineberger, who's also president of Locust, normally has a nice little catchphrase for Atlanta. It's the largest, and it's been noted to be the fastest growing human civilization on earth. The amount of expansion that Atlanta has experienced over the past 20 years has been surpassed by no other city. So I say that to say, though, just recently, a report came out that showed that in the past, between 1992 to 2000, roughly 13% of the real estate in Washington, D.C. was considered a walkable urban community. Only 13. From 2011 to 2008, prior to the economic calamity, it went up to 26%. As of 2009, that number is now 60%. Let me put it in another way. Current and established walking urban neighborhoods in Atlanta accounts for only 0.55% of the region's land area and 1.5% of the region's office, rental, and other commercial real estate. That is just in the last 20 years. And last but not least, and this is what my development community gets really excited about, is that the average rents in these current walkables in Atlanta, the poster child of sprawl, is 112% higher than its suburban counterparts. So if we can see the revolution happening in the backyard of suburban sprawl, what are we stressing about, right? So all of a sudden now you're coming here and you're saying, well, gosh, this is like the market is there. What can we do to continue to unleash the revolution? And what I like to put out is a couple observations. One of the things that we've recognized is that we talked about connectivity. We talked about connectivity in the plenary before, the idea of connecting development with the transit. But there's a much more fundamental aspect when it comes to the private sector, the public sector, and the activists. There needs to be an increasing number of connectivity between these key stakeholders. Oftentimes, we are using different lexicons to achieve the same goal. And one of the things I would like to put out is that that's one of the biggest challenges that we have to do to address in order for us to continue to not just have the revolution, but to control it. And here's why. Some of the key, and I'm just going to put this out there as a string of thoughts. There are a couple of things that we are recognizing from the real estate community that we are facing from both the activists, from stakeholders, from the public sector, that we're beginning to wrestle with. One of which is gentrification. How do you manage or avoid or prevent acute gentrification? Secondly, affordability. Many people won't want to tell you this true stance because from a developer standpoint, we like to make money. You're going to see in DC, you see developers paying $800 per square foot for retail, for land, partly because they know that they can make money in that jurisdiction. And that would be true in other markets across the country. But the problem we have with that particular situation is we have a simple choice. Will we figure out a way to manage this revolution, or will we be like Europe, where individuals who lived in these once low-income, distressed neighborhoods are actually pushed out to suburban communities who are no longer connected to the job centers? Third, resources. We have Congressman Blumenauer, who will probably speak much more eloquently than I about the dysfunction of Washington today. But with that being said, that has been a gift to regions, localities. The fact that Washington, D.C. no longer has a spigot to support highway construction, you actually have communities asking a simple question. How can we grow smartly? How can we develop where people want to move here? Which actually forces us to have a conversation of connectivity between the activists, between the developers. And we all seem to come to the same conclusion. Walkable urban communities is the answer. The next one I want to talk about is placemaking. One of the biggest challenges that we have to think about as we manage this revolution is essentially, if you've been to Washington, D.C., you've probably been to Columbia Heights at least once or twice. But if you also go to Columbia Heights and take a trip to Arlington, you'll begin to notice that some of the development begins to look a lot alike. A lot of the local serving neighborhoods, whether it's mom and pop stores, are beginning to find themselves priced out of these local communities. One of the biggest critiques from some of our community surveys about why individuals are leaving the drivable suburban development into walkable urban communities is because all the suburban development look the same. There's always a Target, there's always a Walmart, there's no diversity. These are challenges that we ourselves have to face and come up with answers with. And last but not least, I want to just touch on another challenge, policy innovation. Because of dysfunction of Washington, D.C., one of the things that we are finding on the local development basis is that oftentimes localities, states, or even development community are putting most of the capital to actually finance transit and TOD projects. While the federal government, even, and Congressman Blumenauer can attest to this, if $1 is put into a project from the federal standpoint, you begin to have the federal rules, such as, excuse me. So what I'm trying to make is how can we begin to think about how do we create incentives on the local level and partnerships with the federal government when it comes to policy. Another issue here is that on policy innovation is one of the major programs that we worked on in Congress during the MAP 21 was actually creating a pilot program within the TIFIA program. How many people are familiar with TIFIA? The Transportation Infrastructure, Innovative Finance and Infrastructure Act. Moral of the story is a low-interest loan program that the federal government provides local communities to build infrastructure. One of the major changes was that this program can now be used for public transportation and TOD. However, one of the things that came out of that conversation is that TOD projects have to use the same threshold that highway projects have to be, meaning they have to be at least $50 million in project costs. Now, many of you know most TOD projects are not $50 million. They're at bare minimum at least $20 million, if not lower. What I'm trying to raise here is that as we talk about the revolution, as we prepare ourselves to really get down to the ground, we have to think about some of the issues that we're seeing coming down the pipeline. But here's the funny part of my presentation, and which is almost through, is that a lot of the answers are already here today. We have a lot of those answers. One of the things I like to talk about when we talk about gentrification, thinking about some of the innovative practices that a lot of communities are using when it comes to value capture. The idea that there's a lot of value that's created around these TOD projects. If working in the connectivity with the stakeholder, with the public, with the developer, we can come up with a strategy to take that same value and create affordable opportunities for individuals to stay in their community. If you talk about how to ensure that communities are no longer, becoming cookie cutter TOD, well, you can do a new project called crowdsourced placemaking, where you actually allow communities using technology to actually self-determine what type of projects they want in their community, which I'm pretty sure if any elected official would probably love to have a crew of YIMBYs supporting projects in their community versus having to deal with NIMBYs. Next, we talk about financing TOD projects, whether on the macro scale, coming from the federal government or all the way down to the local level. There are new technologies like crowdsourced financing, where literally, and there goes my time, I have one more minute, but literally, there are innovative projects, innovative technology that allows us to accomplish all of these things. And last but not least, I think one of the biggest things I would just want to end on is simple. On the federal level, we constantly see that politics for TOD or smart growth can be very harsh. Generally perceived that a lot of the individuals in Congress, particularly on one side of the aisle and also in others, and the other, do not generally support. I am here to tell you that's not necessarily true. I've actually been in some of the most conservative members, senators' office, who have actually pounded on the table supporting TOD, and actually have written more letters to USDOT to push their office to enhance TOD connectivity, whether it's through the TIFIA program, whether it's through New Starts or others. But why? It's because they did not just see the local smart growth organization. It wasn't just the local mayor, but they also had the business community. And again, as I pointed out today, we talk about connectivity. How do we manage this revolution? We have to do it together. Thank you.
Well, it's important to note that it requires everybody engaged, business, private sector, public sector, nonprofits, to really move these things forward, and that this is complex business, as you're probably noting from these different speeches here. There's a lot to think about and a lot in play in making this stuff real on the ground. With that, I want to introduce Lynn Peterson, who is the current and recently appointed Secretary of Transportation for the state of Washington. She comes to this role with a set of deep experience in the public sector, starting in the Clackamas County Commissioner, where she was involved in putting together countywide transit plans, and then was most recently at the Oregon Governor's John Kitzhaber's Sustainable Communities and Transportation Policy Advisor. I think you'll find her story interesting because it sounds to me like Revolution has had an impact on her life.
Good morning. You are awake. I was going to make you get up and stretch, but oh, do you want to? Okay, everybody up. Everybody up. Do a little stretch, back and forth. There you go. Healthy communities. That's what we're building. All right. All right. At least the blood is flowing, right? Well, I think we've had a really great panel, and just want to add just a slightly different perspective, coming at it from the role of now being at the state level and really talking about how a state DOT can be a partner in building healthy and viable communities. So I asked Dan if it would be okay if I could tell the story about how my life was transformed by Revolution. He said, no, that's not a story we want to get out there. And so I come from Wisconsin originally. I was a highway design construction engineer with Wisconsin DOT. There was a project that kind of questioned everything about how we do business, and started asking questions that were beyond the engineering part of my job as a traffic control engineer. And everybody said, you should go into planning. So I ended up going to Portland State University, getting my planning degree. That was one of those points where your mind just feels like it's being blown to go from engineering into planning. And during that time period, I ended up at Metro, the regional government, doing travel demand forecasting, and ended up being able to go to my first Revolution conference in St. Louis. And as we're walking around, I looked at the conference, and there on the program was an engineer giving a presentation on the very project that I had originally questioned why I was in engineering, and that was Highway 12 in Wisconsin, Madison North to the Dells, if any of you know that geography. And yeah, I can see some head nodding. It was controversial at the time. It's now a built project, and the person that was giving the presentation was Walter Kulash from Gladdings-Jackson, who I think is now retired. But I sat in the audience, and after all this time going from engineering to planning, I had never seen anybody give a presentation where I was given permission as an engineer to change the assumptions. In other words, let's look at the basic assumptions that an engineer makes. What was going on in that project was that it was going to go from a 2-lane, very windy rural roadway to a 4-lane divided freeway section for about 50 plus miles. It was going to have major impacts on every farm along that road, from farm access to historic farmhouses and communities, being divided and gone. Those, the very sustenance of Wisconsin, which is farming, kind of felt like they were under attack by the project. So Walter said, you know what, let's start with the design speed, not the posted speed, but the design speed. Does the design speed need to be 75 miles an hour? What if the design speed was closer to the posted speed? For every 5 miles an hour that you can bring down the design speed, the less footprint you're going to have, the less runoff you're going to have, the less cost you're going to have, the less the right-of-way has to be as large when you go around a curve. You take out less houses, you take out you mitigate a lot of the impacts. Then the question was, well, why were you going to 4-lane? Well, it was for safety. All right, so what's causing the safety problem? The safety problem was being caused by combines and other farm equipment on a 2-lane rural road, and a lot of people going too fast and coming up on the farm equipment that was going 25, 30 miles an hour. So his question was, well, why not, instead of 4 lanes, go to a 2-lane divided, so you get that buffer of safety, and then instead of a 3rd and 4th lane in each direction, what if you added gravel shoulders like we do for the Amish in Wisconsin, so that they have the ability to drive, but we don't have to actually pave the road. So a wider shoulder and maybe gravel. All of these ideas were not the normal plug and chug that I had learned going through school and then getting into Wisconsin DOT. Not that it was bad, it's just the way we had done business for a very long time. So the very core assumptions that engineers make based on the context of the situation are what's important, and that's what I came away from that Railvolution, and then dedicated my life to making sure that when we move forward with projects, it depends on the environment that you're in, and you have to be sensitive, context-sensitive solutions. Kind of the next step is practical design, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But really, why I'm here is how to talk about how the state DOT can be a good partner within the urban environment, because that's where a lot of these conflicts and a lot of the safety needs to be focused. So WashDOT, I have decided to start claiming, have no facts yet, working on it, is the most multimodal DOT in the country. So you proved me wrong. We run the ferry service. It's the 4th largest in the world, the 1st largest in the United States. We have a grain train, over 250 miles of track in eastern Washington to get grain to market. We have the Amtrak service running up and down the I-5 corridor. We own and operate all of the state highway roads and bridges, 18,000 lane miles of roadway and 3,800 bridges. One of course, is very new. It fell down. I don't know how many of you. That was my 4th week on the job. Yeah, it was great. But our guys did a great job, and actually Bill, where are you? Bill was in the audience, and so is Lorena and Keith. Stand up. These guys actually made that all happen. Stand up. They got the Skagit River Bridge up in less than 3 months. First emergency design build contract allowed under MAP 21. They did it. So, you know what? We as a state and as a country have been working on a system. We've been building up a system of capacity, whether in our cities or in our states, for a very long time. 150 years ago, we were building what? Canals. We were getting goods to market, right? Goods to the East Coast. We were building canals. We built up the system and got to a point where then we had the railroads come in. Those railroads kind of grew up over 50 years, got to a very large system, network, and then the interstate highway came in. That's a lot of capacity, linking our cities, linking our nation together. We're at that point now where we're in a maintenance and preservation mode, right? So we have limited resources to take care of all these massive systems that are in cumulative a lot of capacity. So how is WashDOT looking into the future? We're doing something that we all know we need to do, and that is to make sure that when we look at a problem on the roadway, we analyze it to make sure that we look at the context of the entire system, both on the state road and off the state road. Because our congestion on the state road may not be actually caused by the state road. It may be caused by an arterial congestion. It might be caused by a lack of other modes. We need to be able to make sure that we're looking at it in terms of the system. So that's the first thing. How are we doing that? We're going to be looking at things on a corridor approach. WashDOT has one of the best data management, data collection systems of all state DOTs, and I will make that claim as well. We have a lot of data, but we need to start using it to analyze, not just collect the data and report it out, but to analyze. So we've taken our congestion report, and it is now called the corridor capacity report. For every corridor in the state, we are looking at the multimodal capacity of that state highway multimodal integrated system. So when you read the report now, it just doesn't talk about level of service or hours of delay. It actually talks about how much capacity we have within that corridor on transit, bike, ped, road. It's an integrated discussion. So we start moving this conversation in a new direction. And if you look at the governor's strategic plan, transportation is under prosperous economy. Under prosperous economy, we're doing performance-based outcomes. That one of those indicators is not how many vehicles we're moving, it's how many people and goods in the corridors we're moving. We need to start moving towards that kind of performance-based outcomes, whether we're a city, a county, or a state. It's really about moving people and tons of good, right? Tons of goods. It's not about the vehicles. We need to find all of the ways that we can move people and tons of good. So the other thing that we're doing is we're implementing practical design, that outgrowth that I talked about of context-sensitive solutions, PennDOT being one example, Missouri being another example. PennDOT basically said we don't have any money to do all of these projects that are in this financially constrained list. It's pretty more than financially constrained. So they went the next step and said, so how do we actually solve the problem on the ground, but do it at the least cost that we possibly can? So they started looking at things like roundabouts instead of signalized intersections. They started looking at all of those assumptions that we've made over the years as engineers on our standards, which are really guidelines, which really should be guidelines, and started saying, how do we do that? How do we look at the context in which we are playing and shrink down that footprint so it costs less, but we still move goods and people? And we do it in the safest way we possibly can. The other thing that we're really working on is scenario planning, and we're going to have to really have a bigger conversation about what that means in the state of Washington. There's been some infancy discussions about scenario planning, but looking at the different ways in which each of our regions, each of our cities are able to make decisions and pull levers and play with transit versus road capacity versus land use, because transportation is the tool to the land use, and that's the other thing that we're putting into our strategic plan is what is the community's outcomes that they want that are based on the land uses, not just getting rid of a congestion point. Finally, we are working with the legislature right now on a transportation package, and they're looking at a 10-cent gas tax increase over 10 years. Period, and we're trying to weigh the maintenance and preservation side of what we just talked about and the capacity building, and how do we do that in between with all of the modes, and how do we have that overarching conversation. And there's a lot of tools that I'm hoping that they will ask us to move forward on, including practical design and including making sure that we actually decrease costs so that we can put that money back into safety projects, because really that's what this is all about in the end, is making sure that our multimodal environments in the urban area are as safe as possible. So just some ideas to put out there. We are just starting out all of these processes, and hopefully I will have good things to report in a year. So thank you.
So I wanted to thank Lynn for getting everybody to stand up. I know this has been a long set of conversations here. We are going to have a chance for Q&A in a second, so please stick around. I want to make sure you all have a chance to ask some questions of this esteemed panel. But right now I want to introduce Scott Spencer, who is the Associate Director for Advocacy and Influence for the Annie E. Casey Foundation. The Annie E. Casey Foundation is in Baltimore, a national foundation. Scott has led a lot of their community-based efforts to revitalize the east side of Baltimore, but also is kind of known as a professional volunteer. He is the chair of the board of the Smart Growth America. He's been the chair of the board of the Funders Network for Smart Growth and Livable Communities, and serves on numerous other local boards and commissions. So with that, Scott, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, man.
Well, good morning, everyone. I realize I'm standing between you and lunch, but I'm going to go on anyway. Welcome to Revolution at 19. Let me tell you, I remember as a 19-year-old, I was a sophomore in college, and we used to call ourselves sophisticated morons. We thought we knew enough that we wanted to change the world, but we didn't quite know that we had a lot to learn. So we come to conferences like Revolution because, like a sophomore in college, we come here to accumulate knowledge about the ways that we can revolutionize the change in the communities that we want to see in our world. So let me ask you, start out with two quick questions for the audience. One, who came here via the Link Light Rail? Okay. For those of you who are not from the Seattle area, what does 98118 mean to you? It's a question. Nothing. Okay. Well, we'll get to it. If you came in on the link, the light rail stops at Rainier Beach, Othello, and Columbia City go through 98118, a zip code. It's about 6 square miles, and it's otherwise known as the most diverse zip code in the United States. If you've ridden the light rail since it opened 4 years ago, you can see how much has changed in 98118 and how much could be threatened by the good work of transit and transit-oriented development in a place like 98118. Now, you don't know me, so let me start out by saying at the outset, I am a transit junkie. I've been a card-carrying member, Orca member, since the light rail opened in July 2009, and I don't even live here. I also have a New Venture card if you live in Chicago. I have a Breeze card if you live in Atlanta. I have a Smart Trip card if you live in DC and Baltimore. I have a TAP card if you live in LA. I have a Metro card for you New Yorkers. And I have a Charlie card if you're from the Boston area. So, who? I gotta get there. So for me, good transit connects people to economic opportunities. It can lower the real and perceived barriers between the classes, and it can connect the masses to educational, cultural, commercial, recreational, and religious centers in our communities. Good transit tends to blur jurisdictional boundaries and can create an environment for a competitive region. And in sum, good transit is a means and not an end. If I were to leave you with one message today, it is that I hope you come to this conference to enter into an uncomfort zone. Consider it like getting on transit and getting off in an unfamiliar territory, maybe taking a 20-minute walk from the Othello station. It should make your palms a little bit moist and have you just a little bit off balance. And to continue the collegiate metaphor, one of the goals is that you come into this room or come into this conference as a sophomore and you leave as a junior. So let me begin from my own journey. At the Revolution Conference last year, I took my own bold step and rode the bus in LA. In this, I'll admit my implicit bias, and that is like many of those people that buses are really more pedestrian, they're less sexy, and they're more uncertain than fixed rail. I knew where I wanted to go. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I relied on the expertise of a network of strangers to provide me with access to an opportunity that I was longing for. That was to see the Space Shuttle Endeavour moving through the streets. That journey provided me with many lessons to pass along to those conference attendees last year about the need, and I'll say the same things to you, about the need for adequate supports to help all sorts of people navigate what might be an unfamiliar system. The urgency to think beyond our own comfort, and in this instance, to think that transit and development goes beyond rail centers and thinks about whole communities and those communities that just don't carry the attractive moniker of mixed use, but like GB said, must also be mixed income to be more inclusive. And B, that we make our process and approach in engaging communities accessible to people of all backgrounds and from all modes of life. I also mentioned last year the emerging policy work with a group called LANE, the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy, and what's becoming known as Jobs to Move America. Jobs to Move America seeks to increase the manufacture of transit vehicles in whole or in component parts above the level of what the Buy America program at DOT currently does. If you're in the business of transit vehicle procurement, which is approximately a $5.5 billion annual spend, I would strongly encourage you to look into the provisions of this work that has the endorsement of US DOT. A program like this was piloted in LA with Metro, and it has had some pretty good results, including hundreds of new domestic jobs. I had first learned about Lane's work at a meeting in Washington in July 2012, but at Revolution, I met and developed a working relationship with Madeline Janis, who's been spearheading the Jobs to Move America campaign for Lane. In large sum, because of the value of the time spent at Revolution and meeting with Madeline, the Annie Casey Foundation, where I work, became an investor in the work because, for me, it helps to advance the work of connecting low-income people to economic opportunity. For me, the uncomfort zone of an unknown idea advanced by a then little-known organization was relaxed through conversation, networking, and relationship building. That is part of what Revolution is about. By the way, we've had some results from some good results from the relationship. From meetings with DOT and the approval of the piloting of Jobs to Move America, we've met with transit officials in my home state of Maryland. And this past August, we met with the governor of Maryland. A few days ago, one of our partners received a letter from the Maryland Department of Transportation Secretary adopting provisions of the Jobs to Move America work in Maryland's planned transit vehicle procurement for its 2 proposed light rail lines. So within 1 year of a relationship, we've actually had some movement and some progress on some real work. But let me return to 98118. With about 60 languages spoken, 98118 has been labeled the most diverse zip code in the country. It has a median income of about $44,000, with 9% of that population earning less than $10,000 a year. 27% of the population are college graduates. So it's a really diverse mix of folks. It has a relatively low unemployment rate, about 4.8%, and a really low poverty rate for in places where I work with less than 14%. And has been amazingly stable in terms of percentage of households that have remained in the area for 5+ years. There's something about this incredible mix of race, ethnicity, educational background, professions, and land uses that currently exists that would want you to understand, mimic, and aspire toward, even if it's the accident of historic circumstance. If you rode the link, from the moment the light rail descended into the middle of 98118 along MLK Way near Rainier Beach, you saw small businesses, trucking companies, manufacturing supply shops, restaurants, and religious institutions in languages from around the world. You then saw houses. Some had cars in the yard. I saw what looked like a single-room occupancy hotel, and then at the Othello station, you started to witness the change coming. There were placards in the light rail car that had sort of announced it, advertising luxury rentals, and what in many urban places has become the harbinger of the regeneration of a place, but in Seattle, it's the local coffee house, a Starbucks. In the time since the link has opened, I've seen the rapidity of progress at Othello and Columbia City and wondered to myself, where did the string of vernacular ethnic eateries, religious institutions, and small businesses go that were there 5 years ago? I wonder, how long will the small businesses near Rainier Beach Station remain before they relocate or evaporate? One of the great things about coming to this conference is that you get to learn from places like this. Here you have the sophomoric opportunity to ask the craziest, silliest, least politically sensitive questions in your imagination, because you're here not just to understand how to make great places, but you're here to understand how to make great places work for people. In a place like 98118, you can ask about how the professionals learn lessons about engaging people from a community in an inclusive way. You can learn about the real concern of riders adding sexy light rail and curtailing more pedestrian bus service. You can see if mom and pop businesses and mom and pops are being zoned and codified out of existence. And if not, what is being thought about at the front of mind to minimize that threat? You can ask about the challenges that are being faced here with increasing fares, increased ridership, and planned service cuts, and learn about how to address those challenges in your own backyard. And by the way, if you don't have that problem, you should be coming up here right now, because we want to parade you around the conference as an example of success. So 19 years ago, Revolution was the brainchild of the leadership of Congressman Blumenauer. It came at a time when there were grand deals at the federal level for 6-year funding plans for transportation, roads, rail, bike lanes, and trails. It was a niche market, an annual meeting with a place to see friends, talk about good ideas, maybe network for a new job, and go home jazzed about what you do. It's continued to evolve and to grow in size, stature, and attendance. At 19 years old, the movement is somewhat like a sophomore in college. We're finding it necessary to rely less on the security of parental comfort of federal funding for transit and transportation. More states and localities are becoming leading funders of this critical infrastructure, and a diverse swath of voters are supporting this movement toward better connected and more integrated communities with a range of uses, incomes, cultural backgrounds, and amenities that somehow work, like in 98118. So that's it. Get into your comfort zone, ask the sophomore questions, meet someone who does something different than you, and move toward change. Thanks.
Well, Scott kind of said it all. It's really about people, and it's about transformation of communities and opportunities. With that, I'm going to ask if anybody has questions. We've got a lot of really a deep bench up here of perspectives, technical, otherwise, community. So I'm going to walk around. Anybody that has a question, I just come around, and we have about 25 minutes to do this, and we still have plenty of time. So thank you. Is this working? It is. Okay. Well, okay. I guess who else is out? No. So just tell us who you are, where you're from, before you ask questions.
Sure. Sarita Turner. I'm from Oakland, California, work for PolicyLink. And I am trouble. And a few of the panelists know that, not just Scott. But anyway, so really appreciating and building off of Scott's presentation and wanting to applaud all the tremendous work that has gone into equitable TOD. Heard a lot about housing opportunity, mixed income housing, affordability, et cetera. Not as much about the equitable development and opportunities in terms of building local businesses, workforce development strategies, a little bit about construction jobs, but would just love to hear more about the strategies folks are thinking about in their projects or that have implemented in their projects in terms of wealth and asset building in communities for communities of color and low-income folks.
So who'd likes to take that question? Just for a second, there's a lot of content at the conference on these issues. So if you're interested in that, look through the program, but we do have a lot of sessions that focus on the issues you're talking about. So with that, anybody want to address that question? Earl? Well, I don't know, you look like you're reaching over there.
I think this was an area that did not get the appropriate attention as we started 25 years ago. At that point, I mean, if you come to Portland now, I will, on the tours that we give, I will take you down streets for a stroll that I wouldn't have driven you down 25 years ago. The emphasis at that point was trying to help revitalize, rejuvenate. I think we were frankly surprised in some cases in terms of how quickly neighborhoods turned. And we didn't do a good enough job to be able to engage people at the outset on how to take advantage of that. People who, you could have bought a whole block in some of these troubled areas for $100,000 cash, a whole block. And within a few years, there were people who all of a sudden had a $100,000 home. And we weren't engaging with them in terms of what difference, how to leverage that increase in value. There was less emphasis initially about how to make sure that the work was done with the people that was there to be able to maintain the roots. And over time, we have discovered that by building that citizen infrastructure, that there are certain voices that needed to be heard. And I can't say enough about what happened with our local transit agency, for instance, to make sure that there were opportunities for emerging businesses, for minorities, for women occupied elements. Moving a little bit, you saw the GB's presence where in the hottest real estate market in Portland, in fact, in the state of Oregon, 22% of those housing were affordable because of what was baked in to city council initiatives. Some of those areas you can't tell what the housing authority project is. And immediately adjacent to it, there is a no-income housing project. But that was slow to come. We were, I think, a step behind in terms of how to harness the increase in value that took place. And I'm hopeful that over time, we're starting to appreciate the potential here that can be shared, and the community doesn't work if it's a monoculture. But some of those, we were slow off the blocks, but I think you're starting to see some results from that is making a difference.
Chris, you want to pipe in on that?
I just want to. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. I think that is absolutely correct. In terms of, one of the things to address your issue, you have to start on the front end. If you wait mid or at the end of the project, it's too late because the market would take over. But I want to add a piece here that I don't think gets talked about a lot, and that is there are other pressures that we have to recognize, particularly for individuals who are not in this room, particularly Wall Street bankers. Generally, if you talk to a real estate developer and he's doing a TOD project, he's looking for capital financing. And one of the major pressures that a developer has, even if he wants to have an affordable unit or an equitable TOD, is getting a banker to agree that to underwrite that project without a credit-worthy tenant. And oftentimes that's like the missing link. A developer wouldn't mind having a local pizzeria, but if that mom and pop store, belly aches, the developer is left hanging in the back. And many times bankers, or particularly who are, dealing with Wall Street pressures, are very reluctant to give, financing to that type of arrangement. So with that being said, you find a lot of the Domino's, the Papa John's, the Olive Gardens, the Targets, those institutions, those corporations who have a well-financed balance sheet that can come into these type of TOD projects. So it makes it easier for the developer himself. Okay, good. I can get it if someone come in and not necessarily do the brain drain. And I think one of the key things here is that recognizing that there are other stakeholders who are a key, although the community itself will say, hey, we're going to put some incentives here. Oftentimes it are these major institutions that literally kind of tie your hands. Also, I highlight a common a term that a lot of your real estate developers now who are generally your drivable suburban are what I call or like we like to call in our shop, NASCAR drivers. They don't have the skill sets to actually do equitable TOD or affordable TOD. Oftentimes you need to have developers who are like jet fighter pilots, right? NASCAR drivers, they drive straight and make a left going 150 miles an hour, while a jet fighter has to go about 600 miles an hour up, down, left, right, while getting shot at. These are complex issues. One of the things I always challenge local communities is that you don't want to bring in your average developer to do these complex projects. So at the very least, even if if you want to maintain development among your development industry, you may want to encourage joint partnerships, joint development agreements with other more sophisticated developers who may not be doing the development project, but will provide that level of technical and sophistication as well, which will get you to some of the successes we've seen in places that may not have that level of sophistication.
So I'm going to move on, but just one comment on that, and that is that there's a lot of communities that struggle with this, and I think the challenge really is to be clear about what your outcome goals are and recognize that the systems that are built take a long time to put in place. So the more you can anticipate and think about the potential impacts of that before they occur, you've got a chance at creating some programs or partnerships that allow you to address that issue of equity for the longer term. I'm going to go over here.
Thanks, Dan. Mary Jo McGuire. I'm a county commissioner from Ramsey County, which is in Minnesota. I hope you all come to Revolution next year. Ramsey County includes the capital city of St. Paul and 17 suburban communities. I was wondering if you could just comment more fully on why TOD is illegal, and just a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, laziness would be one way. I use that to get your attention, so I guess I was successful because you asked the question. The illegality is that a majority of our codes require auto-oriented development. So they require high parking ratios, they require setbacks, they require lower density. There's that whole conversation of NIMBYs. That's part of it. So you went through on the Central Corridor a very kind of proactive process dealing with the community to change the Central Corridor and to change some of those densities. But how that marches back into the neighborhoods in that corridor is still an issue. So and then kind of going to the earlier question about who are we building these communities for? I would say that part of the challenge was initially all of our focus was just on answering your question, how do we make it possible? The next question then is, how do we make it possible for everybody and equitable? And increasingly that means getting more partners to the table that have more of those skills. And, the analogy that I would use is implementing TOD is like a relay race. One person can't run a relay race on their own. There needs to be handoffs and clear understanding between the different partners and on those roles and responsibilities, and a clear understanding of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. One of the challenges in the Twin Cities is that now too much of the conversation is only about equity and TOD. And so in the east end of the Central Corridor, you already have enough naturally occurring equity, so you need more middle-class housing to actually deal with that. So it's going to be a balance. So what happens in the other end of the corridor may have a different kind of an outcome. So I think we need to just balance these things. And I wanted to just kind of go off of Scott's point before. It may be uncomfortable to say sometimes we have too much equity, but, we don't need more affordable housing in some parts of the corridor. We need more jobs and market rate housing.
But don't you
I
think
just- oh.
we're often prisoners of the planning infrastructure that takes so much? It took so much time to get these zoning codes in place in the first instance, and we've got engineering manuals that are years, if not decades, out of place, and people are absolutely schizophrenic about parking. And we're seeing backlash in Portland now because we are able to have much more affordable housing in some neighborhoods because you don't have to have 2 parking spaces per unit or 1 parking space per unit. We've had buildings with no parking spaces per unit. But then people are all of Twitter in terms of, so to speak, in terms of, where are all these cars going to go to? And people think they own the parking space in front of their house, but they don't anywhere in America. And it is really hard to work this through with local governments to be able to deal with the challenge between minimum and maximum parking ratios and what it means, which I think goes back to the citizen infrastructure to get people to roll up their sleeves, to think through the implications about what they get, what the trade-offs are, and raising the comfort level, which happens if they feel like they own the changes, if they participated in the changes, if they've argued them through. Citizens will accept a lot if they're the ones who are making the changes.
Want to let Lynn comment now?
So I did some work for TriMet as a consultant in the Portland region, and the question was, how do we get more senior and disabled folks on the fixed route because it costs less than the delivery door to door, and over 50% of them could use fixed route if they could actually access the bus stop within walking distance. So the question was, on those high frequency bus routes that were almost all state roadways or highways, what does the land use allow for along that roadway? And what we found is that the zoning along the corridor adjacent was all strip type of outright zoning, and the housing was a conditional use, which is, of course, that next step harder for a developer to get to with the neighborhood. And where it was allowed outright was right behind this commercial strip, between the commercial strip and the single-family home neighborhood, where the neighborhood would also have a giant upsetness about having a higher density, even if it's only 3 stories, right? So how do you flip it? Or how do you allow for the conditional use to be actually outright allowed? And that was the question, is because if you can get it right there at the bus stop, not within the quarter mile, which a lot of that multifamily was allowed, they can actually access the fixed route bus, making for a more cost-effective system in the long run. But that takes a long time. So it wasn't illegal, but it wasn't easy, making it much more difficult.
Okay, anybody else have a question?
Hi, my name is Catherine Krieger. I manage TriMet's Transit-Oriented Development Program in Portland, Oregon. I wonder if any of you have some advice for some of the state highways that run through a city. Sometimes when I'm at a table trying to work out designs with the state highway, I feel like I'm in the 1960s again. And we have some really important communities next to these highways that are really suffering.
I think Congressman Blumenauer would like to talk about orphaned highways now.
Yes. We've attempted in the last 2 reauthorizations to have a specific program that would help states and localities transition what are essentially main streets now that no longer serve the function of the pre-interstate highway. But local governments don't have the money to take them over and upgrade them, and the state doesn't have the capacity to make the changes that are necessary. So my notion is to have a pool of money designated for orphan highways that nobody wants anymore, that don't fit that capacity, but with a relatively minor investment could really change the utilization, could make it possible for the city to incorporate it into their inventory. And the state would like to get rid of it. They don't want to clean it. They don't want to maintain it. They don't want to have snow removal. But everybody's stuck. So this is my solution, is to have a small pool, orphan highways, make the transition, and realign responsibilities and roles.
I'd like to echo on that. In my community, we have Route 51 going through the center of our community, which is our main street, and it's owned by the state of Illinois. So my first request would be, please fix that road, but they don't have the money, so it's probably one of the worst roads in our community. It has a pedestrian bridge near a university that's been closed for 2 years because the state doesn't have the money to fix it. We're dealing with issues like that. Now, we've done a master plan on that transportation corridor because it's a very important corridor in our community. And the plan recommended a road diet and incorporating better bike pedestrian facilities on it. I will tell you, there are places on that road that have lanes wide enough you could drive your car sideways down it, and you'd still have plenty of room in the lane. So a road diet is appropriate. We did a study with IDOT on that, and the recommendation was road diet, incorporate better pedestrian and bicycle amenities along that road. And the answer from our Department of Transportation is you can build bike lanes wherever you would like, just not on our roads. So there's a disconnect in the state on this between, a policy. They have the governor and legislature has instituted a complete streets program. They made an error in the language, and they said should instead of will. So DOTs use that as a way to walk away. Most of the people left in our DOT are older highway guys, and they just, it's going to take a change in that organization and thinking before we can really get substantive work done. And I appreciate your notion on a federal program that would allow us to work with the state. We would gladly take them if we had the money to fix them.
We're going to have one last question here, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Yes.
Thank you. First off, It's a privilege to be in your company, finally. My name is Robert Prudhomme, and greetings from the little Midwest Lake Belt state of Michigan, Detroit specifically. Thank you for everything you do. One of the issues we have at Transportation Riders United is, as we're trying to identify ways to create place, to make walkable communities, we are still dealing with a mentality that wants to continually and perpetually expand our interstates through the city of Detroit. Two specific projects, Interstate 94, which, by the way, would be the most expensive per mile expansion in highway history, and I-75 in the northern suburbs, are really taking our money away from much more desirable projects that can create place. The I-94 project will sever 11 overpasses through the heart of the city and isolate many neighborhoods. And we've been fighting this since 2003, and it keeps rearing its head. And I guess the question is for Congressman Blumenauer, any suggestions on how we can activate federal highway and federal resources to stop this boondoggle? I mean, the billions of dollars they're talking about would build our transit system that we have planned already. So there's a question and a plea in there at the same time. And again, thank you for all you've done.
Well, the notion of having a fundamental policy to fix it first, particularly in areas like metropolitan Detroit, where there's so much potential, and there isn't really a need to get people out of Detroit faster. But you know, accomplish that goal, you know.
We still have 750,000 people there.
Yeah, no. And a landscape that has tremendous opportunities. And I'm hopeful that we can embed in this notion the same thing that Lynn Peterson was talking about in terms of what we're trying to do, the most cost effective. In energy, we've got least cost energy planning, which has really revolutionized a lot of what's happened with utility rate setting and planning for the future. And we need that same mindset with transportation and starting with fix it first.
Quick question: was this a former earmark, or is this just a project that's currently right now on like the step or the?
It's moving forward. It's been on the books for about 30 years. One administration after another has claimed it as their right.
And so that's great. So a couple of things. One, there's a couple of projects that have been in a similar situation. I'm thinking of like the Northern Belt Line in Birmingham, where there's a strong business community that's been pushing for another, like basically an interstate overpass outside of basically taking a lot of the development away from downtown Birmingham. Also in Charlotte, they were doing a similar situation. In both situations, they had a coalition of businesses that literally worked with the governor, basically that did two things. One, shamed the project, basically showing the return on investment of this boondoggle of interstate, expansion versus simple transportation improvements within the city. So that was one. So shaming is good. And then two, one of the things that we found too is many of these times these projects can't come off the ground because there is no money. Right. And so one of the things that we've noticed, and one of the things I want to, maybe we'll talk afterwards, work with a lot of developers, particularly with Bedrock and Dan Gilbert's shop in Detroit. It's very behooved me to believe that if Dan Gilbert and that whole coalition of developers down there who are trying to remake Detroit, finding that it's not in their interest to have this interstate. And this, again, goes back to a conversation I had, connectivity. Oftentimes, these conversations are happening in silos, where the smart organizations are, trying to fight the good fight. But the business community, who also have a strong interest in trying to promote walker urbanism, are not fully aware. And so this is the place where you should leverage these political. So shaming and connecting to the power structure that you have.
So we're about to wrap, but I just wanted to say, one of the challenges we always have at Revolution is there's so much content and so much to think about that people get frustrated that there are more than one good session at the given time, and they get stretched this way. So just realize that pick something good, pick something that you're not used to, learn something from someone else, and you'll learn a lot about partnerships, connectivity here. Thanks for coming. So many of you are new, and we hope to have you around next year as well. Thank you.